keeping the barbarians from the gate.
I got into the labor movement not because I wanted to negotiate wages. I got into the labor movement because I saw it as a vehicle to do massive social change to improve the lots of people.
Let's take these son of a out and give America back to America where we belong. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, the Tea Party can go straight to hell.
Welcome back to the program on this Friday morning. I'm Brian Sommerfield with Trucker Randy. We are your defending fathers, and we've got a real special guest in this segment.
Yes, Brian, I've reached out to our friend J.B. Williams to come on. J.B., are you there?
I am here, gentlemen. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, J.B.
Been working with Linda Garcia here in Michigan. She's reached out to me, JB, and I'm going to help her be a spokesperson for this Balance of Powers Act that your group drafted and put together. But wanted to have you on this morning because they just passed your bill down in the state of Tennessee.
Tennessee is officially the first state in the country to begin to restore the constitutional republic, beginning with states and individual rights at the state level. And I just couldn't possibly be more excited than I am at this point. It's been a good week.
Well, one of the things that came up in the discussion with Linda was that she had presented this legislation to her state representative, who happens to be the Speaker of the House here in Michigan, Jase Bolger. And his initial response to this bill wasn't all that promising, and she gave me a very lengthy response that he provided, and you have of course put it online at as your Scribe site. What do you think the main problem is? Why perhaps Jase Bolger would initially respond the way he did regarding this bill?
I think there's a number of factors involved, and Michigan's not the only place where we have seen the kind of resistance that we saw from Jase Bolger there in Michigan. I also put out a column on this for people. It's out there at News with Views. If you go look in the archives, you'll see it, relative Jase Bolger's commentary. I actually, when Linda presented the Balance of Powers Act to Jase Bolger, in the face-to-face sit-down, he was seemingly on board with Linda. I know that because she called me right after the sit-down. And then he was supposed to get back to her, after his office reviewed it. He turned the bill over to his legislative legal aide, Doug Maines, up there. Doug, a few days later, called me and went through the bill with me on the phone. And I walked him through, and he seemingly was fully on board at that point. And then a few days later, or a couple weeks later, I guess after that, on one Friday morning, Jase Bolger issued an email response, essentially in sum saying that they found that the Balance of Powers Act was not constitutional. And the reason they found that was really premised on a couple points. One, they are operating under the false assumption that the federal government is some sort of supreme authority over the states, which is not accurate. And they also operating under a false premise that the U.S. Supreme Court is a final arbiter of what is or isn't constitutional in the United States, which of course would make the Supreme Court a 9-member oligarchy of unelected, politically appointed, unaccountable officials, which of course is not what our founding fathers designed at all in the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So essentially, Jase Bolger was asserting in his response that the 10th Amendment and 9th Amendment of the Bill of Rights don't exist, at least in the state of Michigan, as far as he's concerned, that anything that seeks to assert the 10th Amendment rights of the state is somehow unconstitutional in his mind. And he's not alone in that, I have to tell you. We've run into those arguments pretty much everywhere we've gone with the bill over the last 3 years, including in Tennessee. And, it often comes from Republicans as well as Democrats. And I think the reason for that is very simple. There are organizations out there that are advising Republicans both at the federal and state level. Heritage Foundations is one. David Barton and Wall Builders is another. And both of those organizations, although they claim to be conservative, constitutionally grounded organizations, are both out there openly opposing states' rights, both of which are telling both state and federal legislators falsely that states lost their rights during the Civil War. It's a ridiculous assertion. It's the 180 degrees from factual history, but nonetheless, they're out there telling these legislators that, both at the state and federal level, and some of them buy into it. Partially, the ones who seem to buy into it the most, by the way, are the ones that have aspiration for higher office, which of course would include Jase Bolger. So if a Republican aspires to higher office, especially in the federal government, then they are very unlikely to do anything that's on the right side of the people within their state, because they don't want to get at odds with the federal government and blow their future political aspirations. So, I think that's what it really comes down to.
Right. Now, one of the things this then sounds like to me, a situation where this may be a bill or type of legislation that we're going to have to educate the public about, get a grassroots campaign going where in each district, for each state rep and each state senator, we start pushing the legislators to become more educated about this bill before they're probably going to actually introduce it or pass it.
Well, part of it is an education problem. At the federal level, most legislators, meaning more than half, a majority of the legislators, are lawyers. The founders really didn't want any lawyers in those offices, and now we know why. And so, but at the state level, the majority of legislators are not lawyers. And so that's why you can get some things done at the state level that you cannot currently get done at the federal level. But the problem is, because they're not lawyers in most cases at the state level, they refer to lawyers, just as Jase did with Doug Maines, and say, well, lawyer, tell me what's constitutional and what's not. Well, unfortunately, the vast majority of lawyers in practice today, and even Doug and I even discussed this in our phone conversation, and he agreed wholeheartedly as a law student, that unfortunately law schools don't teach the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our founding principles and values at all anymore. They teach precedent and procedure, and that's all. And I was speaking in a Balance of Powers rally in Louisiana a few weeks ago, and there was a little lady. I made that statement in my commentary, and then in the Q&A session, a little lady raised her hand and said, well, what you said about lawyers not studying the Constitution anymore is not right. My husband is an attorney. He's sitting right here. And I said, well, thank you. Stand up, sir. I said, you took constitutional law in law school. He said, yes, all lawyers have to take 2 semesters. I said, tell the people in the audience what they taught you about the Constitution in those 2 semesters. He said, crap, nothing but crap. His wife was pounding him on the arm. She was punching him in the arm because he made my point perfectly. Right. I said, thank you. Sit back down now.
Have a nice day.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, listen, we're up against the break. Can you stay on with us for the next segment?
Absolutely.
I got to set this up because I got a couple Facebook messages. How would the Balance of Powers Act affect specific certain types of bills? How would it be implicated if passed? And I got another one saying, how is that going to affect Tennessee getting federal dollars if they fight Washington? So we'll set those up with you, and we'll continue on with J.B. Williams after the break and get answers to those questions. So
stick around. More to come. We are your Defending Fathers.
9-0. I repeat, this is a hotline providing free quotes for affordable health plans. It's for anyone without health insurance, even if you have pre-existing conditions. Medical costs are the #1 cause of bankruptcy and financial distress. All uninsured Americans are strongly urged to call this national health insurance hotline right away to protect yourself and your family from an unexpected variety of medical costs that could cause financial hardship. Call the health insurance hotline right now for a free quote at 1-800-690-7490. That's 1-800-690-7490. Call 1-800-690-7490.
Welcome to the Maya and Miguel Challenge. Meet Maya and the gang.
Oh, hi, I'm Maya.
Maya and her friends want you to get up and play, because it's always more fun to be active.
Let's get started.
Just go to letsmove.gov and look for Maya and Miguel. You'll find tons of fun activities that'll help keep you healthy and active. Whether you play sports, run, dance, or jump in place, just get up and play at least an hour a day. Take the Maya and Miguel Challenge today at letsmove.gov. A message from the Ad Council and HHS.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Brian Sommerfield. He is Trucker Randy. We've got J.B. Williams on with us today.
Hey, J.B., let's go with that first comment. For example, would Tennessee, now that they passed the Balance of Powers Act, and let's say a bill like Obamacare got passed in Washington, how would the Balance of Powers Act affect their ability to deal with this legislation coming out of Washington?
What we did in Tennessee this week is we established a Balance of Powers Act legislative committee. It's not just an oversight committee. It's not just a review and referral committee. It's an actual legislative committee within the state legislature. And it's essentially a states' rights constitutional committee in which, no matter whether the issue is coming down from the federal government in the form of Supreme Court decision and executive order or by legislative process from the legislature, it goes to that committee if there's concerns about it. They don't look at everything, but if there is legitimate concerns about the constitutionality of that, it gets referred to this committee, gets reviewed by this committee, and because it's a full legislative committee, it can issue action, legislative action directly from that committee in order to block an unconstitutional act by the federal government to answer that question. But it's also established here in Tennessee as a review committee for bills that are being introduced at the state level to review, if a state legislator puts forth a bill in the state of Tennessee that is based on constitutional rights, whether it's individual rights or states' rights, it will also get referred to that committee for review to make sure that when the state is issuing laws, that from the vantage point of this committee, they are constitutional as well. And so that's what we established here in Tennessee. So let's take, Obamacare. In my personal view, it is well outside of the scope and power of the federal government to engage in health care at the state level. And so here, the way it's established, even the public can bring an issue before this committee. Other legislators can bring it before the committee. The governor's office can bring it before the committee. The attorney general's office can bring it before the committee. And so once somebody brings it, or the committee can reach out and take it up itself, by the way. And so once the committee reviews an issue like that and determines that there are constitutional problems with what the federal government is doing, no matter how it is they've done it, they can then issue from that committee legislation to block the unconstitutional parts or the item in its entirety because of its lack of constitutionality right from that committee, and move forward with legislation to block it. And so that's how it would be handled, no matter whether it's an unconstitutional act of the federal government or whether another fellow legislator in the state of Tennessee proposes a bill that is also unconstitutional from that side.
Okay, so it can checkmate federal dictates, executive orders, legislation, or even the Supreme Court's ruling on a particular bill.
That's correct.
Now, let me ask you this. The second comment from one of our listeners was, how would that then, in turn, cause Washington to react with regards to federal dollars for the state of Tennessee?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think some legislators worry about that. We've heard some legislators raise that issue, and the answer is this. Number one, more federal dollars in revenue. Where does the federal government get its revenue from? It gets it from the people in the states. So if the federal government decides to try to cut off funding to a state because it doesn't like something it's doing within the state, I suppose they have the power to do that. But if they have that power, then the state certainly has the power to cut off funding to the federal government as well. And that's my first answer to it. My second answer to it is, the minute the federal government decides to treat one state differently than the other 49, they are already themselves once again in violation of the constitutional protections that says that the federal government has to treat all states the same. So there's potential for some conflict to arise as we go forward in forcing the vertical as well as the horizontal balance of powers established in our constitutional republic. But, nothing's easy. Freedom's not easy.
Right. Seems like we're always fighting Washington over something. This at least puts on record a state law that gives the states more, I guess, authority to enforce their 10th Amendment rights.
It doesn't really give them any authority that they didn't already have. Most people are familiar. If you say, "Are you familiar with the balance of powers, constitutional balance of powers?" Oh, yes. It's the balance, co-equal branches of the three branches of the federal government. There's a horizontal balance of powers and separation of powers. Most people overlook the fact that there's also a vertical separation of powers, meaning the federal government is assigned certain responsibilities and duties and authority to carry out those things within the Constitution, and everything else, as the 10th Amendment states, is the rights and the authority of the states and the people respectively. And so what the balance of powers does, once it's established in the state, is it now involves the state legislature in considering whether or not the federal government is overreaching its authority, and if it is, then it gives it a process, a clean-cut, legitimate legislative process for dealing with that.
One of the another comment that just came in, is there a website that you have actually posted the Balance of Powers Act as far as what it means, what it does, and what the actual legislation is?
Absolutely. Anyone can go to NorthAmericanLawCenter.org. Go to the legislative button. When you scroll over that, it'll open up between federal or state. Go to state, and then you'll see the Balance of Powers Act. You'll see a full summary explanation of it there, and you will see the original model bill posted there also. Okay.
And give that website again.
NorthAmericanLawCenter.org.
.org. Okay, North American Law Center, all spelled out. Okay, very good. And then last question is, before we go to break real quick, what do you think is going to happen in other states? How close are you in some other states, real quick, as to possibly getting this passed beside Tennessee?
We are working in numerous other states. We are at different points in the process in different states. Some states' sessions don't even open for another few more days. Other ones are, somewhere in the process. And what we've done, part of how we were able to get it done in Tennessee, honestly, is that we were able to move quietly and quickly inside the legislature so that there wasn't a lot of outside attacks coming from, the news media and the likes on it, or from the Democratic Party or the left side of the aisle, while these legislators were getting it done. The bill was actually introduced ahead of Tennessee in Mississippi, but the minute Mississippi introduced it, they went public and they did press releases and the likes. And as a result, all the way up to John Daly, or John, whatever it is, the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and Colbert, and, on Comedy Central and USA Today,
right,
was running attack pieces on it. and it caused the Mississippi representatives who sponsored to run from it and go for cover pretty much instantly. And so there, unfortunately, the environment we're working in, you have to work somewhat quietly and stay very focused. And the main thing I'd say is different between Tennessee and what has happened to some degree in other states where we're pursuing it, where it's taking a little longer and there's a little more work involved.
Whoop, we got to go to break. Hold that thought. We'll keep you on until after the break.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
This is Brian Sommerfield and Trucker Randy, your defending fathers on 106.3 Patriot Voice.
Welcome back to the program as we continue our conversation with J.B. Williams. If you want to go to Your Defending Fathers Facebook page or yourdefendingfathers.us, we have the link to the website that he mentioned in the last segment, so you can definitely go there. And it is an archive of a lot of things at the NorthAmericanLawCenter.org. Yeah,
hey, JB. One comment came in during the break, and I really appreciate you spending time with us this morning. I didn't mean to take up your whole morning, but one of the things that I think is important about this issue is that they said that basically the state legislators have forgotten their role as far as the 10th Amendment goes. And you made a very interesting point. A lot of these legislators who maybe perhaps have visions of moving on to Washington when they're done in Lansing, the State House, are the ones that are primarily against this because they realize that it gives back a lot more control and power back to the individual states. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate to say. In fact, a couple weeks ago when our bill was in a committee hearing here for testimony, there was a moment during the testimony where one of the committee members, a Democrat from down in the Memphis area, spoke up, in opposition to the bill and essentially said, I'm paraphrasing, but pretty close to what he said. He said, well, I guess, with something like this, the Balance of Powers Act, I guess there's really no need for a federal government because what we're saying here, fellas, is we can just run our state ourselves. And I thought to myself, yeah, you have it.
Bingo.
Yeah, you have it.
Somebody finally gets it.
And I thought to myself, I was like, man, what a perfect moment to turn this around and say, well, let's go the opposite direction for a second. If the state is just subservient to the federal government, what do we need a state government for?
Right, exactly. Well, one of the comments he made, I watched that video, and he said in that statement, we have 2 U.S. senators and we have 9 congressmen in Washington who I feel do a really good job of representing us. So why exactly are we doing this? And it was like, to me, I was like, are you kidding?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and here's the funniest part about that line. I remember that too. Here's what hit me when he said that. First off, most of the people he just named are Republicans, and he's a Democrat, and he spends every day other than that day talking about how our Republican senators and representatives are doing a poor job in Washington, D.C.
Right.
And then all of a sudden that day he thought they're doing a magnificent job. And once again, I mean, I wished I had the opportunity that day to point out to him that his job is unnecessary if all we're going to do is follow the lead of the federal government, regardless of how that affects the state.
Now, one of the other things that's coming up, unrelated to the Balance of Powers Act, but somewhat related, is there is a lawsuit that Mark Levin's group is pursuing up through the court system regarding the constitutionality of Obamacare over the fact that the bill originally originated in the Senate, not the House, and that there is, per Article 1, Section 7, the fact that anything that has to do with appropriations or spending or money revenue or whatever to the federal government must originate in the House. And how do you see that particular argument moving forward as far as now that Roberts deemed Obamacare as a tax?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how that that suit turns out in the end. I think Levin's organization is right on the assertion they're making right there. Personally, and as you might recall, Obama and company and the Democrats in the legislatures that rammed Obamacare through without any normal legislative process whatsoever taking place during that effort. During their effort and their arguments, they were saying it wasn't a tax. When after it was allegedly passed, and as Nancy Pelosi said, now that we've passed it, we can try to take a look and see what's in it. It went over to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court says, well, it's constitutional because it is a tax. Well, the whole argument in passing it is that it wasn't, and the argument for protecting it, the Supreme Court, is that it is. And this is exactly why, by the way, the federal Supreme Court is giving original jurisdiction anytime there's an argument or dispute between a state and federal government over constitutionality of an act from one side or the other. They do have original jurisdiction according to the Constitution, but they do not have final say. And there's a simple, very clear reason for that. The Supreme Court is part of the federal government. Of course, it's going to side most of the time with the federal government. It's part of the federal government.
They're not really interested in protecting states' rights.
Well, it wouldn't appear so in most cases, would it?
No, not at all. Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we're concerned about on this show is our gun rights, Second Amendment. And as you know, there's a bill pending that they're going to be possibly trying to vote on the Senate side to restrict, magazines and different types of things. I've heard there's an amendment to actually stop the manufacture and sale of certain weapons. How would the Balance of Powers Act going forward, since this bill hasn't passed in Washington yet, it's pending, how would the Balance of Powers Act affect or interplay with a federal law banning Second Amendment rights, limiting the rights with regards to magazines and ammunition and other stuff?
Well, you've heard the term Supremacy Clause, right? The
Yes.
Federal Supremacy Clause in the Constitution. And what the Supremacy Clause says, in essence, is any laws made in pursuance of the principles and values of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights by the federal government shall enjoy supremacy over state and local laws. That implies, of course, that any laws or provisions made by the federal government which are not in pursuance of constitutional and constitutional boundaries and concepts and protections under the Bill of Rights does not only not enjoy supremacy, it's not law at all. It is, if you study the whole debate and the whole case precedent setting around the Supremacy Clause, it all comes down to whether or not the federal government is acting in pursuance of the Constitution and Bill of Rights or acting at odds with the Constitution and Bill of Rights. When it acts at odds with the Constitution and Bill of Rights, it's no law at all. So, and that's what the Balance of Powers Act at the state level seeks to put back in balance.
So, putting this into proper perspective, for example, the federal government felt that, back in the 1920s, that women deserved the right to vote. So they passed an amendment. 19th Amendment said that nobody can be denied because of sex the right to vote. So that was a common agreed to idea, concept. They passed an amendment, and it was for the general welfare of what they felt was the entire country. So that issue never really was contested or fought by the states. It was ratified. It was done. So, but a Second Amendment law coming out of Washington, or them maybe even trying to amend the Second Amendment. There's rumors on Facebook, story was today that they may actually try to amend the Second Amendment. But something like that is what you're talking about specifically, where the states could stand up and say, no, we're not going to participate.
Not only we're not going to participate, but we're not going to allow you to do this within the boundaries of our state. And there's a difference between those two things. But I'll come back to the example you gave a moment ago of women's right to vote. The Constitution itself never prohibited the women's right to vote. It never was part of the constitutional text to prohibit the woman's vote in the first place. So but as a matter of application and a matter of tradition and as a matter of daily use, women didn't vote early on. And it was at some point later that women wanted the opportunity to vote. There was nothing in the Constitution that prohibited that from taking place. And so there was really no argument to be had on that particular item. But when you now go to something like the Second Amendment, we all know that the Bill of Rights are additional no-nos, if you will. You remember when you were a kid? No, that's a no-no right there. I mean, you can't touch that.
Right.
The Bill of Rights is an additional list of no-nos, a list of things that the government simply has no authority to touch whatsoever, period. And the American people have been very tolerant for many years, and to some degree partially due to just apathy and non-engagement. But they've allowed the federal government to overreach on a lot of issues and a lot of items for so many years that now the federal government thinks it can do anything it wants as long as the people don't rise up against them. Well, the balance of powers is not only there for the people to be able to push back, but it puts the state government on the side of the people within the state in those battles. And it says, not only are our people, not going to allow this to happen, our state governments on behalf of the people is also not going to allow it to happen.
Excellent. Well, we're going to have a lot of work on our hands going forward as far as educating the public and then getting them to put pressure on the legislators. Sounds like this Speaker of the House is going to have to be taken to task based on that response he gave Linda. So we're going to have sounds like possibly a big battle on our hands here in Michigan.
Well, it is a battle everywhere we've gone with this bill. A year ago we came within one vote of passing in Arizona. And we had the votes going into the floor vote, and one or two Republicans were peeled away at the last minute. And it was such an egregious situation over in the Senate that the then Senate president stood up and threw his gavel across the chamber and stood there for 20 minutes admonishing his fellow Republicans for their behavior. And again, those guys were not peeled off by Barack Obama in the White House a year ago. They were peeled off by people like David Barton and Wall Builders and Heritage Foundation, telling them that the states lost their rights in the Civil War. Nothing could be further from the truth. But when people are not up to speed on what the Constitution says and what it means and where all of that came from, then they turn to a lawyer to tell them. And as the gentleman down in Louisiana pointed out to his wife and the rest of the crowd, they were not taught anything about the Constitution. So a lawyer's the wrong person to ask.
Yeah, amen to that. Well, JB, we appreciate you being on this morning. And again, Brian's already posted your website on our Defending Fathers Facebook page, and I'm sure we'll have you on in the future as we go forward in educating the public and our legislators.
Great, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on. Great to visit with you.
Thanks, JB. Really appreciate it.
Good day.
Boy, do you feel like you've had the knowledge dropped on you today?
A little bit. You need to get your notepad out when JB comes on.
Yeah, you definitely do, and definitely encourage you to go to the website. Again, you can click on it. We've got the link right on at Your Defending Fathers Facebook page and website. You can go to either of those. Click on the link that's got the picture there. I think if you go back a little bit further, you can actually find our original link to the Balance of Powers Act, which I think we talked about in January. The link to that podcast is embedded right in that as well. So if you go all the way back, you can hear that hour back a few months ago.
Well, I'm going to upload this segment into a YouTube video on our YouTube channel and post it as a blog on the Facebook page as well. Good information. Appreciate J.B. Williams taking so much time with us this morning.
Yeah, we don't talk about the YouTube channel as much. We've not. I know during the election cycle we were putting a lot of information up like that on the YouTube channel. We probably need to to bring that up a little bit more often.
Well, we'll use it as a vehicle to post on the page. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Take segments, upload them, and make it, specifically to an issue like this. Spending, 2 segments, 3 segments with JB is definitely a way to get the information out where it's specific and right to what we're talking about. So we'll make sure we get that done later today.
Sounds good. Stick around. More to come. We are your defending father.